Hi, everybody. Welcome. My name is Sarah Eckert. I am a communication specialist at the Office of Polar Programs, the U.S. National Science Foundation. And I'm so excited to bring this live event to you today. So just a few pieces of information before we get on to really the most important part of the presentation is you are all muted and cannot turn on your video. We are coming to you live from a research vessel in the middle of the Arctic. We do that to maintain some bandwidth rather than having the ship have to receive about 100 video feeds. It's a little bit easier. So hopefully you understand. And on that note, they are on the vessel. So there might be some times where things freeze or glitch out. We just ask for your patience during those moments. They'll get reconnected. During the event or towards the end of the event, there will be an opportunity for you to ask any questions that you have, both of the science team and the Coast Guard team. Please use the Q&A option in your webinar to submit those. And then finally, we are recording this event. So if you want to watch it again, if you want to send it to anybody else, you will receive an email likely next week that has a link to the video as well as a bunch of different resources for you to learn more about the work. So we are coming to you live from the U.S. Coast Guard Cutter Healy. They're in the Arctic, and you're going to learn a lot more about the vessel later on in this presentation. So I don't want to give anything away. So I'm going to just jump into kind of the three people that you're going to be seeing most from. So we have Bob Picard, who is a senior scientist at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute, and he studies circulation and water properties of the Arctic Ocean. We also have with him Kaylee Horn, who is a research assistant also at Woods Hole, and she's studying harmful algal blooms really all over the US, the Caribbean, and the Arctic. And then we are pleased to have Haley Howard, who is a lieutenant junior grade at the Coast Guard, a deck watch officer aboard the Healy. She's from Connecticut, and she graduated from the Coast Guard Academy in 2021. And luckily for her, that she enjoys the cold, and seeing as she is in the Arctic, I think she's in a good spot. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to remind you, if you haven't done so yet, please let us know where you're tuning in from. We'd love to see where folks are. I'm going to turn it over to Bob and Kaylee to get us started.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Coast Guard Cutter Healy. My name is Bob Picard. I'm a research scientist at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, and I'm the chief scientist on this mission. We are presently sitting in the Beaufort Sea, and that's north of the coast of Alaska. We're about 35 miles off the coast. We're into pack ice, and it's quite chilly out here. I think the temperature is about 33 degrees, so probably a little bit colder than from where most of you are calling in from. So we're very pleased to have you here today. We're going to start out with a short presentation about the science that's being done on this mission. And then we're going to walk down to the main lab and go into the starboard hangar and show you some of the equipment that we use. And then we're going to show you a nice tour of the ship. And then we're going to finish off with some questions and answers. So I'm going to share my screen and we will get started. Okay, so I hope everyone can see my screen. So the title of the project that we're doing out here is called Monitoring the Western Arctic Circulation in a Warming Climate. And I do want to acknowledge the National Science Foundation, NSF. They're the ones who are funding this program, and in particular, the Arctic Observing Network part of the Office of Polar Programs. So this slide shows you our study area, and I want to point out here the Bering Strait, which is this narrow gap between Russia and Alaska, and that's the only connection between the Pacific Ocean and the Arctic Ocean. Now, on average, there's about 1 million cubic meters per second of Pacific water that flows northward into the Arctic Ocean. And to put that in context for you, that's about 4 times the flow rate of the Amazon. So in oceanographic standards, that's really just a trickle of water. But it's a very important trickle of water for a lot of reasons, including the following. The cold Pacific water is a primary source of nutrients to the Western Arctic. The warm Pacific water in summer brings heat into the Western Arctic that melts the sea ice. The fresh Pacific water strongly influences the stratification of the water and hence the phytoplankton growth. And it does that by trapping the phytoplankton up near the surface where they can make use of the sunlight. And finally, the zooplankton from the Pacific enter the Arctic through Bering Strait. And the zooplankton, they're a primary food source for whales. I think probably everyone is aware that the Arctic climate is changing in profound ways, and including the following. We have warmer air temperatures, we have less ice, thinner ice, we have more frequent and stronger storms, melting permafrost, less snowfall, more rain, more river input, and warmer water from the south. So let's just go through a few of those quickly. So last summer was actually the hottest summer on record in the Arctic Ocean. And the plot you're looking at on the left is showing you the temperature difference from the long-term average in color. And you can see it's all red. So the Arctic is heating up, and some of these are as warm as 7 degrees Fahrenheit above the long-term average. And on the right here, this shows you a time record of that change. And you can see about 1980, it really started to heat up, and it's really just been steadily getting warmer and warmer as each year goes by. Now, in terms of ice, we first started measuring ice from satellites in the late 70s. And typically it's in September when you have your seasonal ice minimum. So in this plot here, the yellow line is showing you the median ice extent from 1980 to 2010. And then a little bit later, from 1990 to 2020, you see that it's moved further in. And now this is showing you what happened last summer. And you can see how much the ice has retreated. And that was only the sixth amount of extent of loss that we've had. So it's even worse than you're seeing on your screen here. And some models are predicting that we will have ice-free conditions in the Arctic as soon as a few decades from now. All right, I told you that we had more frequent and stronger storms. Well, here's a really beautiful visual satellite image of an Arctic storm. So this is a low pressure system, and the air is circulating around like this. And these low pressure systems tend to propagate down in this direction, and then the strong winds come along the coast. So a few decades ago, we had a lot of shore-fast ice along the coast, and these storms really wouldn't make a difference. But now, with the lack of ice, these storms are resulting in a really strong storm surge and a lot of wave action, and that's causing massive erosion all along the coast, and that's a really big problem. And here's an example of what I said from warmer water flooding in from the south. So this is warm water coming through Bering Strait, and this particular image was from August 2016, and these temperatures are about 50 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's really warm for Arctic standards, and it's getting to the point where you might even be able to swim in that. So the circulation plays a critical role in the Arctic ecosystem. And I told you about that trickle of water coming through Bering Strait. So when it comes through, it splits up into different branches, as you're seeing here in this schematic. But a lot of the water, all from these branches and from this branch, they drain through a canyon called Barrow Canyon. And then rather than just flowing out into the deep Arctic, they actually split. And some of the water goes here in what we call the Chukchi Slope Current, and some of the water goes to the right in what we call the Beaufort Shelf Break Jet. And it's this particular current that I'm interested in. And I'm interested in it for lots of reasons, including the fact to see how it impacts the Beaufort Sea and how it impacts the Canadian Arctic Archipelago further to the east. And we've had a mooring in this current for over 20 years now. And the mooring is an interdisciplinary mooring. So we have a lot of different instruments on it, and we measured all these things that you're seeing here: the water velocity, ice thickness, temperature, salt content, chlorophyll, nitrate. We have a proxy for zooplankton, and we also have a passive acoustic device that measures the sound of marine mammals as they go by. This is what the mooring looks like. We have an anchor, and we have a very buoyant top float, all right? And that holds the wire taut through the water. And then we just strap all our instruments on there. And as the water goes by, we measure all these different properties. So how much water does the current transport? Well, you can see in this time record that it depends on the year. And interestingly, we're not really seeing any trend here. And that's a bit puzzling because there is a trend in Bering Strait. There's been more Pacific water coming through as the years go by, but we're not seeing that here. So that's a puzzle, and we're going to try to figure that out. And the other thing you're seeing is very strong year-to-year variation, which is something else that we're trying to shed light on. Now, this is showing you how the transport varies through the year. And you can see that most of the water is going by in the summer months into the fall. And the reason for that is because that's the time of year when most of the Pacific water is coming through Bering Strait. And it's also the time of year where the winds start to die down, because normally these winds will oppose the current, but in summertime, they're much weaker, and hence you get a stronger current. What type of water does the current carry? Well, this graph is showing you a year-to-year view of the water going by, the temperature of the water going by the mooring. So each panel here is a year of record, all right? So this is 2015 to 16, I'm sorry, 14 to 15, 15 to 16, and so on. And the y-axis here is the depth. So this goes from about 35 meters down to the bottom. We can't stick the mooring too close to the surface because it could get damaged by ice. And the color here shows you how the temperature varies through the year. So the warm colors are about 50 degrees Fahrenheit. These purple colors are very cold. They're near the freezing point of seawater. So you can see some general trends. Not surprisingly, the warm water comes through in the summer into the fall, and then we get the really, really cold stuff in late winter into spring. But you can also see from year to year, there's lots of differences, and these are some of the things that we're trying to investigate. But there's one other aspect of this figure that I want to point out, and that is all of these warm spikes. And you can see my cursor here. You're seeing these warm spikes, and they're happening every year, okay? So what are those warm spikes? Well, they're something that arise from a dynamical process that we call upwelling. And what that means is the wind blows from the east, and this process is able to draw water from offshore down deep and bring it up onto the continental shelf. All right. And the water that it's bringing up is actually warmer, and that's why it's showing up as warm spikes. The water actually came from the Atlantic Ocean and went all the way around the Arctic, and now we're pulling it up onto the shelf by this process. And this process has a lot of ramifications, including it impacts bowhead whales. So bowhead whales are the only regularly occurring baleen whale in the Arctic Ocean, and they come through Bering Strait in the early spring. And they make it all the way over here to Amundsen Gulf, which is the first entrance to the Canadian Arctic archipelago. And this is where they have their summer feeding grounds. And then late fall, they're coming back through Bering Strait, back down into the Pacific. And here's where our mooring site is here, right with the star. So I told you that we have this passive acoustic device, and it measures 2 times of the year when these whales are going by. We have a spring peak and we have a fall peak. All right. Now the spring peak, we understand that. That's really due to the ice conditions. So here's a satellite image of typical ice conditions during spring. All right, very thick ice out here in the basin. But along the shelf here and the slope is where the ice first starts to melt. So it forms what I call the spring corridor. All right, now bowhead whales, they need to have open water because they need to come up and breathe. So they will make use of this spring corridor on their way over to the feeding grounds. So that, we understand the spring peak. Now, the fall peak, this is what the ice looks like in the fall, all right? And the ice pulls way back away from the coast, and you get this huge amount of open water. So there's no reason for the whales to be going by my mooring, right? But they do. Why is that? Well, it has to do with the upwelling that I just told you about, all right? We have a fall peak in that upwelling, all right? And that's because the winds pick up in the fall. And it's bringing that warm water up, and that warm water is chock full of zooplankton, which is just what the bowhead whales like to eat. And that's the reason why they're choosing to go by this mooring. So here's a really nice example of how environmental data from our mooring is shedding light on the broader ecosystem. All right, that's about the mooring. So every 2 years, we get on an icebreaker like the Healy, and we service the mooring. But in addition to that, we also do a broad scale survey of the circulation, and we begin in Bering Strait and we go to the north and then to the east. We go at different times of year and we see very different ice conditions. I'm showing you some slides here. We have periods when we have a lot of melting going on. We have periods where we have a lot of thick, solid ice that's very hard to navigate through, which is, these times it's very nice to be on the Healy because they can make it through this ice. We have other times when ice is forming in the late fall, and the sun is just peeking above the horizon. We have times when there's complete open water, and that's when it can get rough out. And then we have some really special times when we can see the northern lights under newly forming ice. We also see an array of wildlife. We see polar bears. And so far on this trip, I think we've seen 6 to 8 polar bears, including 2 cubs. We see walruses, seabirds, seals, and this is one of my favorites. This is an Arctic fox. Now, during our survey, we continually lower an instrument package over the side of the ship. It's called a conductivity temperature depth, or a CTD system, and we're going to show you that in just a few minutes when we walk down to the starboard hangar. Here's our plan for this year. Again, we start with the measurements in Bering Strait, and we work our way all north of Alaska into Canadian waters, and we end up in those whale feeding grounds. So it just so happens that today we are sitting right here at that red dot, and that just happens to be where my mooring is. So today, believe it or not, is the day that we're going to deploy our mooring. And I wanted to show you a picture of what the ice looks like today. All right. And maybe this is a little bit different from what you might have expected Arctic sea ice to look like. But all this brown stuff, it's part dirt and part biological growth. This actually came from the shore. It was shore fast ice, and it broke off and it got blown up north by the winds. And now it's sitting right over our mooring site. And it's actually kind of annoying because we're trying to do our mooring work, and this ice is very difficult to work in, but we'll do our best. Now, on every cruise, we accommodate a considerable number of ancillary programs, and this cruise is no exception. We have nutrient sampling, we have ocean biogeochemistry, we have vertical sinking of carbon, and the way we're doing that is one of the researchers attached a camera onto that package that we lower, and it takes a bunch of photographs of zooplankton and old phytoplankton that are sinking. They eventually reach the bottom, and they support a very active benthic ecosystem. We have another researcher who's measuring different isotopes, and that can help us sort out the types of water that we're seeing, whether it's sea ice melt water or river water or glacial water. And then we have a harmful algal blooms program. And we also have a seabird observer who sits on the bridge with his binoculars all day long. And finally, we have a community observer. He's from Kotzebue, Alaska, which is north of the Arctic Circle. And his job is to liaise with the different communities along our route to let them know what we're doing and to make sure that we're not interfering with their subsistence activities. Okay, so at this point, I would like to hand it over to my colleague, Healy, and she is going to tell you about the harmful algal bloom program.
Thank you so much, Bob. Hi, everyone. I'm Kaylee Horn from Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. And I wanted to start off with the fact that the ocean is absolutely full of phytoplankton. Phytoplankton, just in case y'all didn't know, are tiny microscopic algae that are drifting around in our waters. They're taking up carbon dioxide, producing oxygen, just like our plants on land. And they are forming the base of our marine ecosystem. They're super, super important. As their populations grow really quickly and densely, that is what we call a bloom. And these are absolutely critical for our marine ecosystem, but every once in a while, they do cause problems, which is what we call a harmful algal bloom, or HAB. Now, this is any bloom of phytoplankton that is causing harm to humans or the environment. There's many different types of these, but the ones that we're particularly studying up here in the Arctic are ones that produce toxins. So one of these species that we're looking for is called Alexandrium catenella, and this is the little video of them cruising around on the screen here. These algae produce something known as paralytic shellfish toxins. These toxins will accumulate in the organisms that eat them, like shellfish, worms, zooplankton, and then they're able to pass those up the food web to marine birds, mammals, and even humans. And the effects of these on us can cause things like paralysis. So the initial signs are tingling, numbness, trouble moving, breathing, and eventually, in worst cases, even death. So not good. And these toxins from these algae and others have been found in the recent years around the Arctic. You can see some news articles over here on the left, and a study in 2016 actually looked at tissues from a bunch of different mammals all around the coastline and found toxins in just about all of them. So that's what really kicked off our work up here, to look for the populations of these algae. So some of the stuff that I'm doing while I'm on board the Healy is I'm collecting water samples so that I can look for these organisms. This is a picture of that CTD, and these gray bottles are what we're trapping water in. Bob's going to go over that in a little bit, but I collect water from those and I filter it down to look for the cells of these algae, their DNA, and toxins, which is great. We also have an instrument on board, which you'll probably see when we walk through the main lab, called the Imaging Flow Cytobot. This thing's really awesome. It's basically a microscope with a camera in a can, and it is sampling from the underway seawater system, and it's able to take pictures of just about everything that's coming through that's in the water around the ship. So this is actually an image from the 4th of July on this trip, and this is a diatom bloom that we were moving through at that time. And in 2022, we had one of these aboard one of our research cruises, and we were actually able to detect an Alexandrium bloom in real time. So this is a really useful instrument for us to have on board, so we can detect those things as we're going right through them on the ship. Another thing that I'm doing while on board is I'm looking in the sediments. And this is actually really interesting because Alexandrium, that same species I was talking about, lives most of its life on the seafloor in the sediments. You can see that this image here is a graphic of the life cycle of Alexandrium. And this resting state when they're living down at the seafloor is what we call a cyst. And when the temperatures are warm enough and the nutrients are good, they'll actually release from that sediment and cause a bloom. So we look for this cyst stage to learn a little bit more about their life cycle. And we do this by taking a big scoop of mud off the bottom using this instrument, which is called a Smith-McIntyre grab, which I'll be showing you in a little bit here. But I'm able to take a little bit of that mud from the surface so that I can take it back to the lab and figure out how many of these resting state cysts are hanging out in there, so we can get an idea of where these things are and what regions might allow for a bloom to occur, where these blooms are depositing these cysts, and all of that good stuff. So this is a graph or a figure, a map of this region from 2022, and we detected this really massive cyst bed right off of Ledyard Bay, which is really interesting. The last thing I'm doing from that sediment is I'm actually collecting any little invertebrates that we find. So you can see in this image, we've got some brittle stars on the top. We're not typically saving those because they're too spiny, but we collect anything that we find in that sediment, and we're able to figure out what the toxin loading is in each of those. And that can tell us a little bit about how toxins move through the food web around here. And this ties in really nicely with the work that Bob is doing and others. So we're able to see where these harmful algal blooms are moving through this region, where currents are lightening up, as you can see in the center here, right, where we found that big cyst bed, and also relate it to that temperature information that we're finding out as well. It can tell us a little bit about how these blooms will be occurring, and hopefully allow us to understand more about what's going on in this region. And I'm only one person on this team. We actually have a whole group working on this project specifically, and a bunch of others working on HABs in this region as well to learn more. And obviously, this is really important as we're thinking about a changing, warming Arctic, because with warming temperatures, we only expect for these HAB impacts to increase and worsen. So it's really important work. And with that, we're going to have a little tour. So I'm going to stop sharing. Thank you, everyone. Oh, what's going on? Computer technology struggles. Awesome.
Stop sharing.
Okay.
Okay, everyone, so we're starting our tour here in the Future Lab, and this is where I sit, and this is where we, think about what science we're doing, and we're constantly changing plans, so I'm in constant contact with the bridge, the operations officer, the captain, to try to plan our next move. So now we're going to go down along to the main lab. Okay, so this is our main lab here, and Kelly, I think maybe we should tell them what all these styrofoam cups are.
Oh, yeah, we totally should. So we just had our deep cast, which was over It was just about 3,000 meters, which is it's almost 2 miles down, which is crazy. So we lowered that whole CTV down to the bottom. And when we did it, we decorated a bunch of these styrofoam cups.
Started at that size.
And then they shrank down to be itty bitty. So the air pockets in the styrofoam actually collapse and compress as they're getting lowered. And we had probably over 200 cups that we sent down. We had some from the school group, the science staff decorated, the crew decorated. And so we have all these itty bitty cups now for everybody, which is super fun.
Okay, and Kelly, the IFCB.
Oh yeah, so this is the IFCB, which I was mentioning earlier. This is what's taking photos of all the phytoplankton that are coming from the underway seawater system. This is actually from Thomas Brugia's IFCB. He's working for IUS, but it's really cool because you can see as things are coming through the underway seawater system, we're seeing a lot of detritus right now and specks, but it's taking a ton of photos every single second, collecting images that turn into data. And so this is actually from, this is a bin we're looking at, has a bunch of phytoplankton from right where we are today. So it shows you what's around us in the water. We've got some beautiful diatoms. Thankfully, we haven't seen any Alexandrian catenella, that marble species I was telling you about, but it's really awesome for us to have this on board with us. We're glad Thomas has it.
This is what we call our whiteboard, and we've put all our information for the stations that we're going to occupy. And it's the nickname of this thing is the Board of Lives. And the reason for that is because we'll put something down and inevitably will change, and hence we're lying. So we have to keep on top of that. Here we have the nutrient setup, and here's our nutrient analyst doing her work. This is a really important part of our program. And over here is where we have the instrumentation for our moorings that I told you about. These things over here are the releases, okay? And we talk to these releases acoustically, and they release the mooring when it's time to recover it. And this is just an example of one of the instruments that's going on the mooring. This is measuring velocity in the water column acoustically. Okay. So now we'll go over to the starboard hangar. Okay, so this is where we have our CTV, all right? And you've seen it in the pictures already. So all of our electronics are down here, and that's what measures the various properties like the temperature and the salinity and oxygen, turbidity of the water, various things. And we do that electronically. So this package gets put out on deck, gets lifted up, put in the water, comes down right close to the bottom, and we have an altimeter. So that tells us exactly how close we want to go. And then that gives us the information going down. And then on the way up, we have these bottles, right? And the end caps are open, right? And then we send a signal down the wire, and those caps close, and we trap water inside the bottle. And when we measure different levels as we come up into the near the surface, and we get all these different water samples, and we can measure things that we can't measure electronically, such as the nutrients, okay, which is a really important measure. Okay, so that's our CTV package, and now Kelly's going to tell you about the bottom sediment.
Yeah, so this is the spit package paragraph that I've all on the PowerPoint there. This thing probably is item, but it's a really cool, simple mechanism that works terrifically. There's a few different types of sediment graphs, and this has worked really well for our purposes up here in the Arctic. So this we just moved over from outside, so we didn't have to get all pulled out there. But really simple mechanism. Just involves some levers and some weights. Set this thing up. Just this big old lever. Crunch it down. Set it. Roughness. Arms. And lift up. And notice on this thing, it's got these little feet. This is its trigger mechanism. So when the whole instrument goes down to the bottom, these will land first. If you want to scoot back just a smidgen here, I'm going to show you what it would look like theoretically with the bottom. I'm just going to kick this, and it's going to be a little loud. Bam, big old scoop of mud, and then we bring it back to the surface. So nice little doors, side. When it gets up here, we flip it open, grab some surface sediment if it looks good, and then we take one time to sift through it and pick out the invertebrates, which has been everybody's favorite part. So I have some of those things with me. You'll see some in a video later when they're living. But basically what we're ending up with from this tiny little mud sample, which I take back to the lab to look for cysts, those harmful algal bloom resting state cells. We have some that we can use for germination experiments. So we can actually isolate those cells from the mud and grow them up into a culture, which is really awesome. We can do a bunch of work on genetics and figure out where things are coming from. And then I've got all these fun frozen dead things, which we love. So these are some examples of what we're actually pulling up. Anything that has soft tissue that we can grind up. We love the worms. These are very frozen, but we get a lot of worms in this sediment. It's kind of incredible the amount of diversity and stuff you get in just a really small volume. And then, yeah, we ship these off to one of our collaborators, Kathy Lefay, and they are able to figure out how much toxin is actually in each of these organisms. It tells us a lot about how they're moving through the food web. So really awesome. Cool stuff. So, yeah.
Hi, I'm Lieutenant Junior Grade Haley Howard. I'm going to give you a tour of Coast Guard Cutter Healy. Coast Guard Cutter Healy is the United States Coast Guard's largest icebreaker at 420 feet and 16,000 displacement tons. We can cut through 8 feet of ice. Come with me. I'm standing in the middle of Healy's flight deck. Here, we have the capability to land both of the Coast Guard helicopters. Behind me is the hangar. We are able to store Coast Guard helicopters in there, but currently we don't have any on board. Let's go check it out. Since we don't have any helicopters currently stored in here, we use it for our gym. Now we're gonna go check out the computer lab. Hi, Brandon.
Oh, hey there.
What's going on in here?
Oh, we're just monitoring our underway data collection. So we have a variety of sensors and systems across the ship, and this is our control center where we can see everything that's happening.
Nice. What is this screen down here?
That one is the multi-beam, so that's showing an image of the seafloor and letting us know how deep it is so that when we send our instruments down, we can keep those off the bottom.
Awesome. Thank you. Keep up the good work.
Thanks.
Next stop on the tour, we're going to go check out the bridge. This is the bridge. This is where we navigate the ship from. We have radar and electronic GPS in order to get us to our destinations safely and on time. In the background, you can see our conning officer and our deck watch officer navigating us through the ice to get to our science station.
Hi, I'm Marty Reedy. I work for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I'm based out of Anchorage, Alaska, with migratory bird management. And we're up here surveying for marine seabirds. We've been doing this for nearly 20 years now in Ships of Opportunity. So Dr. Picard is kind enough to have us aboard his ship. And we've got quite a bit of data collected, and we're able to make associations between the apex predator seabirds and the environment and climate.
Awesome. And what kinds of birds are you most excited to see?
Well, always the ice specialists that we'll see up as we get closer to the ice, hopefully. I mean, by definition, they're hard to see or rarely seen only because of where they're mostly located. So the ivory gulls, black guillemots, of which we've already seen some so far, are particularly exciting.
Awesome. Thank you, Marty. Have
All
a good
right.
one.
You too. Bye-bye.
Hi, Shad. How's it going?
It's going good.
What are you doing up here on the bridge?
I'm just looking for polar bears and making sure we're not hitting anything in particular.
Oh, nice. And you're the community observer on board. What does that mean?
Yep, so that means I'm in contact with all the local indigenous and villages to make sure we aren't interfering with any of their subsistence hunts / whale hunts, fishing, any of that particular stuff.
Awesome. Well, thank you for all you're doing up here.
Yep, thank you.
Now, we're going to go find Ensign Wheeler to talk about the Engineering Control Center.
Hi, My name's Ensign Brian Wheeler, and I'm a student engineer on board Coast Guard Cutter Healy. Right now, we're in Engineering Control Center. This area is where we monitor all of the engineering systems on the ship. Behind me are two of our 4 main diesel generators. These generators convert diesel fuel into electricity, 6,600 volts, about 8 megawatts each, which we use to power ship's propulsion. That's about enough electricity to power a small town. This screen here is the machinery plant control and monitoring system. This allows us to remotely monitor and control all of Healy's engineering and science equipment.
Now we're gonna go down to the mess deck to see where everybody eats.
The galley serves 4 meals per day for over 130 crew and scientists to support around-the-clock work. The meal planning is done well in advance of the deployment to ensure the culinary specialists have all the ingredients they need for deployment legs of nearly 60 days at sea.
Now, let's go see the crew's living spaces.
Hello, I'm Lieutenant Junior Greg Gordon. I'm a student engineer on board Healy, and I'm going to give you guys a tour of one of the JO berthings here on the ship. So if you come on in, this is a typical 4-man stateroom. These are our racks. This is my rack. Inside the stateroom, we have our workstations where we get most of our work done. And then, yeah, we keep all of our stuff nice and tidy in these lockers, as you can see. So all of our personal belongings and uniforms fit in here. And then, yeah, it's a great place for us to just hang out, get work done. And then one of my personal favorite features of the room is this window right here, which faces forward. So every morning I like to look out the window, check out the ice, and yeah, just take in the nature. So yeah, thanks for coming to the tour of our berthing.
Now we're gonna go to the starboard A-frame to check out a CTD cast, and then we're gonna walk over to the aft working deck to see a bottom grab.
Look at when you can.
Hi, Bridge.
Try to take the swing out if you can. Down.
All right.
Bridge deck. The Smith Mac has entered the water.
Deck bridge, understood, enter the water.
I think you'll be getting your rock now.
Yeah. Good. Take it. Put it in there.
There's a.
Whoa. What's the word? Cousin.
Yeah. So now we're collecting invertebrates out of the sediment. And they're going to be frozen and tested for toxins.
Okay.
So that we can see whether or not the toxins that are potentially in the soil are being absorbed by the base of the food chain. And usually this is a lot more muddy. This is basically all rocks. So we're going to see one. So worms, clams, these little amphipods, sea cucumbers. That's the majority of the kind of things that we get here. We'll get brittle stars every once in a while, sand dollars, but those have too much hard structure. So we need those for sampling.
Okay.
For the soft tissue that we're looking for.
Thank you for tuning in for the tour, and thank you to the National Science Foundation for hosting this event.
Before we start the Q&A, can I introduce the captain of the Healy, please?
100%, please do.
So everyone, this is Captain Shallop, and she's the captain of the Healy.
Hi, hello everyone. Welcome aboard Healy. Thank you very much for joining us today. I hope you've had opportunity to learn a little bit more about the science that we conduct on board, and we look forward to answering your questions.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Captain. And as I was saying, please use the Q&A function that we have in our webinar to submit any questions you have for really any of the individuals that you saw or any parts of the ship or the science that we covered today. So while folks start putting them in, I do want to start off with a question. So Bob, for you, you talked a little bit about the sea ice and the different extents of the sea ice that you saw or that you're studying. Wondering how the status of the multi-year ice in the Arctic is and what that might look like in the future.
Sure. Yeah, the multi-year ice is disappearing really rapidly. So a few decades ago, most of the Arctic had multi-year ice in it. And what we mean by multi-year ice is ice will grow about 1 meter every year. All right. And if it doesn't melt, then it'll continue to get thicker and thicker. And we used to have ice, 4 or 5 meters thick all over the Arctic. And again, this was decades ago. And now, just because of the climate warming, it's just been melting back. And now a good portion or most of the Arctic Ocean is really now only first-year ice. And there's only sort of a small area north of the Canadian Arctic archipelago and north of Greenland where they have some of the thick multi-year ice. And even that's starting to get a little bit loose. And, it's really alarming for a lot of reasons for the ecosystem. But in terms of actually measuring the Arctic Ocean, there's a little bit of a silver lining. It allows us to get research vessels into some of these areas where we could not go before.
And so since you have been studying this region for a while, Bob, can you talk about maybe some of the qualitative changes that you've noticed in your time in the region? Obviously, you've shared the data, we see the satellite imagery, just from your experience having been in this space and seeing the changes.
Yeah, well, I guess my biggest observation, of course, does have to do with the sea ice. And, we used to come up here 20 years ago and regularly encounter ice in the Chukchi Sea. And, talking to, some of the elder folks that I used to work with decades ago, there would be multi-year ice that we just talked about, making it very difficult to do some of the science. And now on some of these cruises, we come up here and we don't see any ice. And obviously there's a bunch of impacts on the ecosystem. I touched on a couple of them. But again, operationally, it's a little disappointing to come out on a heavy icebreaker and not see any ice. Yeah, I would say that's the biggest change I've seen is just the amount and the thickness of the ice.
Very cool. So I'm going to shift gears to the Coast Guard because we got questions about that as well. So what is kind of the biggest challenge from like the ship operation standpoint about operating in the Arctic environment? Is it the sea ice? Is it I say internet, but you guys clearly have figured that part out, which we're appreciative of. Just other aspects. What would you say is the biggest challenge of the environment that you're operating in?
I think 2 pieces of that. So speaking of the ice, you may hear a little rumbling and see us kind of moving back and forth like an old Star Trek episode. We're actually in some pretty heavy ice right now as we're operating through conducting the research that we're supporting. So two challenges. One is finding the right ice or areas where we want to do different kinds of research. So it's not just ice we're looking for. Sometimes we look for open areas where we can deploy and recover subsurface moorings. So we want to find an open area. Sometimes we want to go out onto an ice flow and put out equipment. So we need to find an ice flow that meets the needs for that. So it just depends on what kind of science we're doing. So that's a challenge in addition to navigating to getting there in the ship. So while we're very capable, we try to be efficient in our transit. So we work very closely with the National Ice Center to get ice imagery to kind of plan that out. The other part is just the remoteness. We are very far from ports where we can moor and get food, fuel, things like that. So those are, I think, are the two most challenging parts of operating in this region.
All right, and you mentioned food, and someone just asked a question, so I'm going to transition into this. They asked, how much food do you take with you? I think Haley mentioned that you're prepared for about 60 days at sea, if I'm remembering correctly from the video. But I mean, I don't want to run out of food ever.
No, we don't. And so in anticipation of this, we have culinary specialist second class Munsell. So I'm going to ask him to come in and answer that question.
Hi, I'm CS2 Munsell. I was so for the amount of food that we pull out for these long period of times, we'll purchase, 20, 30, weeks of food prior to leaving. So we have to get, produce per every port call. It's quite a bit. But keeping it fresh is one of those long-term games. It's
How do you plan for how much food to bring on? How do you know what to bring?
So we'll make a schedule of the meals, 12 weeks out, and then we'll end up doubling that amount. And then you have to take that, how many meals you're going to need, 4 meals a day, multiply it by how many people we're going to have on board. So you end up planning for, we'll have anywhere from 110 to 140 ish people on board, and they have to multiply that by so many meals.
And I assume plenty of coffee as well.
Plenty of coffee.
All right, priorities. These ships run on coffee. So you talked about you have a number of people, and this can go to anyone who has the information, or what's the split, I guess I should say, between, we've got our Coast Guard and we have our scientists. So what is generally the split on board between those two groups?
You want to take that question? Would you like me to take it?
You take it.
Okay. The Healy has a permanent assigned Coast Guard crew of about 84. It changes depending on the time of year, if we have more people coming in or coming out. And then we can take up to 50 additional personnel. So that can be a mix of scientists. We have 2 officers from the Royal Canadian Navy on board right now with us as part of an international professional exchange. Well, the past couple of years, we've had opportunity to have international guests on board just to share information about how we operate in the Arctic and ice breaking and doing research in the ice. We'll also sometimes take journalists aboard who are interested in long-term documentation of the work that Healy and the science teams do. So majority is Coast Guard, and then quite a good amount are also civilian support staff who work on board Healy to make sure that all of the equipment is up to the academic standards needed.
Awesome. That's a good overview of what the ship is made up of. We have a lot of family members, I think, of coasties who are tuning in. I'm sure they love to hear and maybe even see their family members. So going back to the science quickly, and I don't know if Haley's there, but we have a question about those harmful algal blooms, and they're wondering if there are any atmospheric studies looking at harmful algal blooms.
There are some folks that are working with satellite data to understand where blooms are. You can differentiate some different categories of bloom, but you can't necessarily get down to the species level like we're doing here. So you can identify a diatom bloom from space or some types of dinoflagellates based on the color. So there are folks that are doing that work, and we got an image early on in the cruise from one collaborator that sent us an image of where a bloom might be, and I think it's a diatom bloom, but really interesting stuff. Yeah, there are people working on that. I'm not specifically, but we do talk with people that are, so we can learn a little bit more about what we're coming into.
Very cool. And I know we're like getting close to the top of the hour. I feel like there's so many questions and there's so much information, but we have to go with something about life on board, which is what do you do in your free time? What are there activities that are planned or different entertainment? I don't know, maybe have an open mic night every Tuesday. I would love to see that. If you do, please let me know. Yeah, so what's it like?
Bosun's Mate, second class, Vincent Caduto. So on board, we have so many entertainment options. Honestly, this ship is so set up to keep people underway for extended periods of time like we do. I can speak for myself and, my deck department. We always are playing board games. We do Super Smash Bros. Tournaments. We watch movies. And then our ship has a fantastic morale program where, they have movie nights in the hangar. We'll do karaoke nights. And then we also have programs set up for our workout nuts, like our Iron Sailor program with like t-shirt rewards and trophies, and we have cycling classes. So there's tons of stuff to keep us occupied on board Healy. We have multiple different cruise lounges, so there's tons of places for people to hang out. And our mess deck is also a fantastic spot to go, and we have tea time, so we'll go down, have some tea, chat, have some snacks. So lots of fantastic options.
And kind of related to that, I mean, your ship is operating what, 24 hours a day? You serve 4 meals a day. So what does that look like for both? I mean, the science teams obviously have a lot of work to do, as well as the Coast Guard with the operations of the ship. So what does a standard schedule look like? Is it 12 hours on, 12 hours off? Is it, are you guys, and I'm sure it differs based on your job and science versus engineering, let's say.
Absolutely. I wish I could tell you there was a standard schedule. Most of the time, people are up all hours of the night. You might get off of a 4-hour watch to go to bed for 2 hours and get a call that, something broke or something needs to get turned on, and we have to do some kind of operation throughout the ship. So like you said, we run on a lot of coffee. Definitely the lifeblood of the ship. And but for our science crew, a standard work schedule right now is 12 hours on, 12 hours off. So we'll have a night crew and a day crew, and we just kind of go through the motions depending on what cast we have. We can take some breaks here and there, but that's our primary mission, so we don't mind doing it.
Very cool. And I want to just kind of leave it with Bob. We've talked a lot as we kind of come to the end of our event. We've talked so much about the science that you guys are doing in the Arctic, the impacts that changing climate is having on the region. Do you have any last words or a final message that you want to leave everybody who joined us today about the work that's being done by you, by your team, by Arctic scientists in general, that you just want to leave folks with?
Well, the most exciting part of my career, of course, is going on ships and working with great crew and great people taking these measurements. And, I think in general, with technology being what it is and computer modeling becoming more powerful every day, I think there's been a sort of an idea that we can, not go to sea as often and just rely more on models and reanalysis products and things like this. So I guess I would like to leave your listeners with a plug that it's really important for us to come out and measure the ocean, whether it's the Arctic Ocean or everywhere else, because that's telling us the honest to goodness truth. And we're always seeing surprises, and these surprises, yes, they'll, numerical models will help us figure out what's going on, but we really need to measure. And now focusing on the Arctic Ocean, the Healy is a fantastic science vessel, but we need more Healys. We really need to get out and sample more of the Arctic Ocean. So that's the plug I would like to leave everyone with.
Right. Well, I am going to share just quickly with everybody a few resources. You can follow the National Science Foundation and the Coast Guard on social media, as well as the Healy has their own Facebook page. And if you want to learn more about Bob's work and about the Coast Guard and the Healy, you can follow these websites. I will be sending an email to everybody who registered with all of these resources. So no panic if you don't get it down immediately, but check them out, follow it. And I want to extend my appreciation and thanks to everybody aboard the Healy today, the scientists, the crew. You guys are doing amazing work. I know you're out there for a long time. And we are so grateful for the commitment that you are making and the sacrifices you're making being away from your friends and family for as long as you are. So I want to thank you so much. And I want to thank everybody who joined us today for this live event. Stay tuned. We like to have live events all the time, or in our Arctic and Antarctic season. So please keep an eye out on your email. You'll be getting some more information from us. And I wish you all a very safe rest of your Tuesday. Yes, it's Tuesday. And for the folks aboard the Healy, a safe rest of your cruise. So thank you all very much. And we'll talk soon.